Okay, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Welcome to our midsummer August 13th Tech Talk. Hopefully, everybody's having a great summer and not getting too much of the smoke and other things that are happening across the country right now. So today's Tech Talk, ISO 14025, the 2026 update, what the new environmental declaration rules mean for fenestration. So today I want to welcome Shiva Zargar and Wacey Crier. They're the co-founders of Build Neutral. Their company offers LCA and EPD and carbon footprinting services to the fenestration industry across Canada. Build Neutral has been a very active participant with Fenestration Canada. They've done some sessions for us at some of our events over the last year or so. And Build Neutral will be collaborating with NRC, Leighton Consulting, and FenCan on a life cycle inventory project this fall. That's going to be obviously very interesting, active group. So if you're interested, if you've not seen any of the info on that, you can reach out to Adrian Edge at FenCan, or Jonathan at Leighton, or Shiva and Wacey here today if you want to hear more about that project and you want to get involved. So Shiva and Wacey, take it away.
Thank you. Go ahead, Shiva.
Thank you so much, Cherry, and thank you, Fenestration Canada, for having us today. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Shiva Zargar, co-founder of Build Neutral. My background is in sustainable bioeconomy at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I did my PhD, where I developed a platform integrating life cycle assessment, techno-economic analysis, and multi-objective optimizations. And I have 2 master's degrees. In both of them, I focus on life cycle assessment. Wacey?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Wacey Crier. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Build Neutral. I've got a 20-year background in construction quality management, specializing in code and regulatory compliance. I'm from the Samson Cree Nation in Treaty 6 territory. Build Neutral is a certified Indigenous business and as well a member of the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business. And instead of doing land acknowledgements, I like to change it up because that's what we hear most often. I like to do a little bit of history. So last week on August 6th was Treaty Day. Treaty 6 was signed in 1876, and some of the clauses that were in there were the medicine chest clause, which basically meant, I'm going to say Indian because that's the way it was written into the act, and they still refer to it today. Although it should be indigenous, but the medicine chest clause essentially said that the Indian agent had to have medical supplies ready and available for the indigenous people in that area. And that still holds true today. When you go in and get a prescription, most of it is generally covered by the government. So that one is still being honored. There was also government assistance during times of starvation. Um, and it's untrue on how that holds up today. But it's still there. And the third one I wanted to touch on was the annuity payment. So every single year, on August 6th, you can go into the band office and you can collect your money that you get every single year. In 1876, it was $5 for every person. And in 2026, it's still $5. So that was not inflation adjusted. So when you go in, you still get your $5 check every year. So that's a little bit of history instead of the land acknowledgement there. Hope you guys appreciate that. And today we're going to talk about ISO 14025 2026. So 14025 is the ISO standard that governs environmental product declarations. So the goals of the session is to have a brief overview of what an LCA is and what an EPD is, just so that we're all speaking the same language throughout this presentation. We're going to talk about terminology changes that happened in the update. We're going to clarify on a term that has popped up in the standard called prospective EPDs. And again, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please just hold off and save those for the end, and we'll be happy to address them. So ISO 14025 just released a new edition, and the old edition was 2006. The new one is 2026. Now, this whole environmental space has absolutely shifted in the biggest way possible in the last 20 years. It's kind of crazy to see a standard still in circulation for 20 years. You know, most codes and standards are 2-year cycles or 4-year cycles, or maybe even 5 at the most, but 20 years is big. So when we knew this one was going to be released, we knew there was going to be some big changes. And you're always nervous about, what are they? What's going to happen? How is industry going to react to the changes? How are we going to adjust? And so that's what we're here to present to you guys. And we're not going to touch on absolutely everything that changed. We're just going to present on two items, the terminology and the prospective EPDs that we think are the most critical and valid to Fenestration Canada. So why this update matters? So it's more than just a revision to an ISO standard. It's more of a push globally. And the reason being is because the EPDs and the ISO standard are referenced in multiple in regulation everywhere, whether it be the federal level, provincial level, private companies. You're gonna see the word EPD out there. And so when they change what is an EPD, well, that has a huge ripple effect on the greater economy and how these regulations can be utilized. So some of the changes were just greater transparency. So clear, consistent, and complete environmental information is what they're pushing for in ISO 14025. They're really relying heavily on independent verification. So that third-party verification ensures credibility and objectivity and increased accountability. So stronger expectations for substantiation and responsible communication. And we're going to get into that here in the next few slides. So just a quick refresher, what is an EPD? So an EPD is essentially an environmental product declaration. So an EPD on the inside is essentially an LCA study. LCA is life cycle assessment. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes of an EPD is an LCA. So now LCAs have to be conducted in accordance with a couple of ISO standards, 14040 and 14044 are kind of the main ones. So if you're just completing an LCA study, that's essentially all you need to follow. Now, when you move your LCA study into an environmental product declaration, now you're dealing with more rules. So you're going to have the rules of ISO 14025 applicable. You're going to have the rules of ISO 21930, which is a construction product category rule. There's also EN 15804 plus A2 in Europe as well. Those are additional rules that you have to follow. You're going to have program operators that run EPD programs. These program operators could be ASTM, they could be CSA Group, amongst some others that are out there. So they have rules that you follow. They're called GPIs, they're general program instructions. Then you're going to have your product category rules, which are more rules, and you'll have a part A. This is generally a very granular set of rules that you need to follow. And then you're going to have sub product category rules, which are part Bs. They're going to be very, very, very particular about the product that you're developing an EPD for and the rules that you need to follow. So that's the main difference between LCA and EPD. An LCA has a smaller set of rules. EPDs have many, many, many rules and regulations that you need to follow. And in EPDs, it says in ISO 14025 that comparability is critical. So that's why there are so many rules set, because we want to be able to compare products against other products easily so that we can make informed decisions. And when we do that, we need to make sure we're comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. And that's what all these additional rules are basically set up as guidelines to make sure that we are comparing apples to apples. Let's say, for instance, you're just doing an LCA study, you're not doing an EPD, and your goal is to compare, let's say one product to another product. Well, you can't do that in LCA. The only way that you can do that is if you have a critical review by panel. And this is to ensure that whatever product you're comparing against, it's fair, it's equitable. Nobody's going to get damaged or anything during this process. It has to be scientifically valid. So continuing on with EPDs, the PCRs ensure consistency. So it ensures that every EPD developed under that PCR or those set of PCRs are transparent and comparable. And then EPDs have a mandatory third-party verification. And this verification is governed by the program operators like ASTM or CSA Group. and they have to be accredited EPD verifiers. So not anyone could just review this EPD. They have to be accredited to the program operator in order to for this to be valid. And then the program operator is going to publish the EPD on their website. Shiva, is there anything that you want to touch on for that slide on what is an EPD?
I think you explained everything perfectly, Wacey.
Great, thank you.
Okay, now, what exactly is an LCA? As Wacey mentioned, it must follow ISO 14040, 14044. It's a holistic approach that allows us to evaluate the environmental impacts of a product, a process, or a service through its whole life, from cradle, when we extracting the raw material, to transporting them to our manufacturer, to manufacturing, distribution, use, installation, like replacement, maintenance, to the end of life. That can end of life be like recycling, disposal, etc., to the grave. And in LCA, our hands are open. Like we can say, okay, let's do a study from cradle to gate, because I want to know what's happening at my manufacturing stage and how I can, for example, use solar panel instead of wind turbine. Let's say that's the example. But when it's about EPD, EPD tells us, the EPD rules come and tells us, no, if you are developing like EPD for this specific product, the system boundary should be cradle to grave. Then all the manufacturer want to report EPD based on cradle to grave. And that's where product category rules, PCR part B comes. Gives us more rules. Okay, what should be the functional unit of LCA? What should be the system boundary? How we are managing the service life, etc., etc.
And we're going to mention cradle to gate and cradle to grave a few times in this talk. So essentially, again, cradle to gate is just from raw materials to the gate of the manufacturing facility, and grave is right till end of life. For instance, the product category rule ISO 21930 allows only cradle to gate EPDs to be published. But if you were to implement EN 15804 plus A2, for instance, well, now they don't allow cradle to gate EPDs. They have to be cradle to gate plus options. And those options are modules that are, they don't use, but they use end of life. So that would be, if you're familiar with LCA, it would be C1 to C4 plus D. So, selecting the right PCR is absolutely critical to how you want to use this EPD and the outcome of it. Now, EN 15804 has some stipulations where you can do cradle to gate, but for fenestration, I do not believe that would be applicable. Okay, so let's look back at the old types of declaration formats, and this is emphasizing one of the changes that happened in 2026 to ISO 14025. So before, there was type 1, which was eco labels in accordance with ISO 14024. There was type 2, which was a self-declared environmental claim in accordance with ISO 14021. And then you had EPDs, which were considered type 3 environmental declarations. And so this terminology stood for about 20 years, and now they've completely eliminated it. So they're no longer calling them type 1, type 2, and type 3. Now, where this is important is because let's focus on type 1 and type 2. So a type 2 is a self-declared environmental claim. It's made directly by the manufacturer without third-party verification. Where these come into play are, there are some softwares out there that advertise EPDs, and they could give you a type 3 EPD, but they also could give you a type 2. There are examples in the fenestration industry that I've seen where the EPD will say environmental product declaration. Underneath it'll say self-declared, and then it'll say in accordance with ISO 21930. So to the untrained eye, you go, yeah, that's an environmental product declaration. But if you know what you're looking at, you can tell that this wasn't third-party verified and it doesn't have the approval of a program operator. So essentially, that EPD, as of today, would not be valid to be considered an EPD. The ISO 14025 is very particular in saying the only time that you can use the words environmental product declaration is when you meet the old Type 3 requirements or ISO 14025 requirements. And that is to ensure that anything that's being considered in EPD is essentially being third-party verified. It has a set of rules that it's following that are established and managed by the program operator, and the program operator is approving that. Next slide, please. So this is the big change that we're talking about. It's the end of self-declared EPDs. So I'm just going to emphasize one more time. It's you need to be really careful if you're out there choosing an EPD or you want to develop an EPD, that you're not doing a self-declared claim and then calling it an EPD. That might put you in a little bit of risk. So again, the Type 2, we have the LCA completed. It could be done by a practitioner, a scientist, or some software that's out there. The environmental information is prepared and it's self-declared by the manufacturer. It did not follow any set of rules. If it did follow a set of rules, it's not being verified to meet those set of rules. So this now is not considered an EPD. And so if you're going to develop an EPD, you're going to need that independent third-party verification. That third-party verification has to be accredited by the program operator in order for it to be an EPD. It can't just be anyone. You can't just go, hey, I've developed an EPD and I need you to verify it. If they're not from the program operator or accredited by them, then that's not going to be valid, and they won't publish that. And then that's where the program operator acceptance comes in. So, they're essentially managing the program themselves. So, like I said, that could be ASTM, that could be CSA Group, that could be Smart EPD. There's a few program operators out there, and choosing the right one is absolutely critical. And that's where, bringing in an expert opinion is really valuable, because they all have different price ranges, they all have different timelines. Some are more credible than others, some are more flexible than others. You might invest, let's say $20,000 into your EPD and go to get it verified, and the program operator says, no, we won't accept this. So this is why the expert opinion is very important. So yeah, the Type 3 EPD is going to get you, it's going to get you all the way there. And the reason why we're kind of focusing on this in particular is because a couple of years ago, Canada amended the Competition Act under Bill C-59, and basically what they said was it was kind of anti-greenwashing is what they were trying to do. So they were saying that any claim that you make must be truthful and not misleading. Product performance and environmental benefit claims must be backed by adequate and proper testing. And claims about a business's environmental benefits must be substantiated using internationally recognized methodologies. Now, they didn't really tell us, what are the international recognized methodologies that are allowed. They basically just said that, and that's what you have to go off of. And we would consider ISO 14025 and 14040 and 44. They're adopted so widely throughout the world, and we would consider that to be, if you meet those requirements, your claims are most likely going to pass any litigation that you come against. Now, I can't guarantee that. I'm just going to put a disclaimer. We're not lawyers. This is just, our best interpretation of this. And I guess let me give you an example. So let's say that you had company A, and company A had a self-declared environmental product declaration, and you had company B. Company B had a full environmental product declaration. And so company A with the self-declared EPD, they end up, let's say they land a $1 million supply deal, and they got it because they were able to underbid client B, or whatever it may have been. Now, this would be at risk, in my opinion, of litigation under Bill C-59, because they could be giving a false impression of third party. They might have used an international recognized methodology, but it wasn't verified by anybody, so they're not technically meeting the requirements of what an EPD is. some of the fines that they're saying could be implemented are up to $10 million or 3% of gross revenue. There potentially could be an order to compensate buyers and deceptive marketing practices as well. So these are the kind of risks that you need to watch out for when you're developing an EPD is, am I actually getting an EPD in accordance with ISO 14025, or did I get a self-declared, I called it an EPD, and now I'm potentially at risk? So there isn't a lot of precedence right now, because it's such a new amendment that we haven't seen anything yet, but we are, always watching out for it to ensure that we're informing our clients and partners, what they need to be doing and what they need to watch out for. Okay, and then the next big change was prospective EPDs. So prospective EPDs provide credible environmental information for products under development or not yet in full commercial production. So a little bit of history on that is, to develop an EPD, you need to have a reference year of data. And a reference year of data means you need to have 12 months of data to be able to calculate, to do your LCA on. And so historically, a few program operators had general program instructions that recognized prospective EPDs before this was brought into the ISO standard. And they basically said, if you have 3 months of data minimum, then we'll allow you to publish an EPD, but it's going to be considered a prospective EPD. And we're only going to give it validity for 1 year, whereas a full EPD gets validity for 5 years. And so we knew about prospective EPDs historically. We had pursued them a couple of times, but we also knew that the minimum amount of data was 3 months, which a few companies that came to us and manufacturers, didn't have that 3 months yet. They were still very much in the R&D phase, but they were still needing environmental product declarations. And so ISO 14025 came out and clarified and put prospective EPDs in the code, which is great. And they went one step further where they said there is no minimum amount of data that you need for the prospective EPD. It can also be based on design data, which is pretty awesome when it comes to, supporting R&D, guiding product development, and trying to figure out, is our low carbon product, is it actually low carbon? Like, where are we at here? So that was pretty good for them to do that. Now, it still is only going to get you 1 year validity. And at the end of that, before the end of that 1 year validity, when you have a reference year of data, you essentially have to update your EPD with the reference year, with the full 12 months of data, and then resubmit it for verification and approval to get that 5 year. If you don't do that in your time window, then that EPD is going to expire and you're not going to be able to use it. So I think that was really good of them to do from an industry perspective, because, a lot of times when companies are developing new products, it might be associated with funding or a grant or private equity investment. And from what we've seen in the industry is that in order to get that funding, you have to be able to prove that there's a reduction in GWP for your product. And in order to do that, they're stating, provide us your EPD or provide us your LCA. And when you're doing comparability for LCA, as I previously mentioned, you need to do it by critical review, by panel, which is 3 people minimum. And that's very expensive and very costly. The benefit of the EPD side is that comparability is critical. So if you do a prospective EPD based on design data to the same product category rules of products that you would like to measure yourself against, well, now you know where you stand in the industry without having to do the most expensive LCA that you can do. Shiva, is there anything that you would like to touch on with regards to prospective EPDs? You're just on mute right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to mention points about the comparison one. When we are comparing different EPDs, we have to make sure they are following the same PCRs and the same, for example, background units, a background database, et cetera, to make sure we are doing like a fair, very fair comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we would never advise somebody to, develop your prospective EPD or develop your EPD, measure it against somebody else's EPD, and then make a public statement how much better yours is. We would definitely refrain from telling people to do that. But again, the whole idea of EPDs from what we understand from ISO is that comparability is critical. The end user needs to be able to assess the difference between product A and product B to make an informed decision. So, a brief review of where we're seeing EPDs requested and why the old Type 3 or the new environmental product declaration term will become the new standard. So, the government of Canada has the standard on embodied carbon in construction. And essentially, what they're saying for this is if your project is applicable to this standard, you must disclose the embodied carbon footprint of structural materials measured in global warming potential with environmental product declarations. So this standard came out before ISO 14025-2026 came out, and they specifically stated environmental product declarations. Now, so now that ISO has changed and said, well, okay, only the old type 3 can be an EPD. Well, now they've completely eliminated with this terminology the ability to take a type 2 self-declared environmental claim, call it an EPD, and then meet this requirement. So now essentially, in order to meet this requirement, you need to have an environmental product declaration that's been approved by a program operator. And they say where EPDs are not readily available, provide a life cycle assessment report that complies with ISO and is verified by an LCA reviewer. Now, they say it complies with ISO 14025. So now we know that if you're going to do a life cycle assessment that complies with ISO 14025, you need to have it essentially needs to become an EPD. Otherwise, you're not even going to meet this other term where they say where EPDs are not readily available. Now, I'm unsure when the government of Canada or will update this document to align with ISO 14025. I think they will. But then essentially what they say is that it needs to be verified by an LCA reviewer. Okay, so now you've got the cost of developing LCA for your product, and you've got the cost of hiring an LCA reviewer. You're almost going to be at the same cost as developing an EPD as you were if you just do an LCA that's been independently verified. It's the difference is going to be less than 10% of the cost. An EPD will be a little bit more generally. So it's interesting. And this is one of the things that I mentioned previously where, we have other regulations that are mentioning EPDs. And so as soon as the definition of what an EPD is changes, well, now when you look at something like this, you have to apply that change to this document in order to meet it. And some of the materials that are essentially applicable to this. So they do reference the National Whole Building Lifecycle Assessment Practitioner's Guide quite a bit. And so this is essentially going to tell you how you need to model that whole building lifecycle assessment, which is a little different than a life cycle assessment. And they're saying that that you must detail the embodied carbon footprint of the project's early design, as well at least one design solution aimed at reducing embodied carbon that differs from the preliminary design in any of its substructure, superstructure, or building envelope elements, which would be, applicable to Fenestration Canada. And using the National Whole Building Lifecycle Assessment Guide, they do rely heavily on EPDs as high quality data. you can use some background data from the LCA program that you're using, but they don't view that as the best data that you can get. Additionally, we're seeing in LEED version 5 that environmental product declarations are mentioned many times, specifically when it comes to reducing embodied carbon. So they say that you need to quantify the embodied carbon impacts, GWP, of the structures, enclosure, and hardscape. So that at a minimum includes asphalt, concrete, masonry, structural steel, insulation, aluminum extrusions, structural wood, composites, cladding, and glass. So definitely, again, very applicable to Fenestration Canada if a developer is aiming for whatever level of LEED 5 that they're going for. And they also state, just bump back one more slide there, right at the bottom, and this is where the embodied carbon standard in Canada and LEED V5 differ a little bit. So embodied carbon, the Government of Canada standard basically said, we want it at the design phase. We want to see kind of your upstream reduced embodied carbon. Whereas LEED V5 says results must be based on embodied carbon intensities of materials as constructed. So that's a little bit more downstream. What that sentence tells me is that, if we're going to put this window in this building and we're going to measure the results of the embodied carbon or the reduction, and it has to be based on an EPD, basically whatever manufacturer I'm going to choose has to have an EPD for their product. That's how I interpret that sentence. Next slide, please. And again, they say that you must quantify and assess the embodied carbon. And the reason why I included this one is because at the bottom, they say quantify the cradle to gate. So going back to that terminology, cradle to gate, cradle to grave, they're essentially saying cradle to gate, A1 to A3. The goal in LEED V5 is to reduce embodied carbon. Okay, so if you use ISO 21930, you can produce an A1 to A3, a cradle to gate EPD. But when developing your EPD, if you choose EN 15804 plus A2, which is a very common standard for EPDs to meet, well, now you have to model your end of life scenarios. So your C1 to C4 plus your D. So essentially, if you take your same product and you develop an EPD, one is to ISO 21930, the other is to EN 15804, your 15804 EPD will come in with a higher GWP just because there's more modules being declared. And this is, again, I can't emphasize this enough, why it's important to have an expert on your side to be able to understand, what is the goal when developing this EPD? What are you using it for? And what are your plans with it in the future? Because, this is very important. If, let's say a developer or an architect is comparing materials for LEED V5 and they're going, okay, we need to pick a manufacturer that is going to give us a reduction in embodied carbon. And now they're comparing, a 21930 EPD to a 15804 EPD, and they realize the 15804 company might have reduced embodied carbon, but not on their EPD because they're reporting more modules. So, Dr.
Yeah.
Zargar, is there anything I missed in that?
No, I would like to just mention that that's why having the knowledge and science of these EPDs and LCA is important. For example, an EPD is from cradle to grave, but they are mentioning the amount of global warming potential for each module. Like module A1 is this much, A2 is this much, A3 is this, etc., etc. And then there is another EPD, for example, following A1 to A3, cradle to gate. Again, they have A1, A2, A3 separately. But like if you are just looking at the total of global warming potential, then as Wacey mentioned, the number for the cradle to grave is going to be higher, right? Versus cradle to gate. But if someone knows this little bit of information, then they can just like grab the data, put them together to see, okay, how much is from A1 to A3 for this EPD and versus that EPD. So that's about what I'm assuming that the whole building LCA people would do.
Great, thank you. And so now we're going to discuss some other areas where we're seeing EPDs being requested, basically major corporate companies that are driving demand for measurable and low carbon construction materials. So, for instance, Microsoft. So, Microsoft has a couple of mandates that they've published, and basically they're focused on managing the environmental impact of their data centers across their full life cycle. And they're taking an end-to-end approach to help advance sustainability. So when you think about that, okay, they're taking an end-to-end approach. If we're going to sell our materials to a data center for Microsoft, is a cradle to gate EPD going to be good for us, or do we need to develop a cradle to grave EPD because that's the requirement of Microsoft's procurement strategies? Just another thing to look about. Let's move on to example 2, which is Amazon. So Amazon is leveraging the EC3 tool to basically scale decarbonization. I know, Dr. Zargar, you've actually worked with the EC3 tool. Are you able to describe it a little bit?
Yeah,
You're on mute.
during
Sorry.
my PhD, I was in my tax accelerate, the EC3. So basically, EC3 has digitalized all these EPDs because when you develop EPD, they are all like in the PDF format, and now they have like you have a better version of it, like for scientists or architects, interior designers, etc. They can search into their tool to compare different materials, for example, to see better way instead of like reviewing all those PDFs. Short story, it has lots of EPDs, if not all. And as mentioned in here at the Amazon sustainability website, like over 150,000, right? Environmental product declaration as of 2025. So if you have EPD, you can import it into this tool, and companies like Amazon are going to see your EPD and your product.
Yeah, and we don't exactly know, if the procurement team at Amazon is using that tool, but we can assume that if they've, adopted that tool, that they're probably using it for procurement strategies. And then Google. So Google has Portico, and basically what Portico is their platform to basically evaluate healthy building materials. So this is, focused on VOCs. It's in focused on embodied carbon. An EPD is going to get you that information. EPDs also include you have a health product declaration. Well, EPDs also include some health aspects to them, and those are coming from product category rules. So it's not just global warming potential environment. It's VOCs and dangerous chemicals as well, because they state that you have to meet this ASTM standard or that ASTM standard or this California test. And so inputting your EPD into this Portico program for Google, again, we can only assume that if Google is going to procure building materials for any one of their office spaces or whatever it may be, that they're probably going to use their own tool that they developed in order to find manufacturers that are meeting these requirements. So these are just kind of the doors that can open when you develop an EPD, and some of the work that can be done to kind of expose you to different markets as well. So just to summarize everything, I would highly recommend, and it's a good idea to review your existing environmental communications. So if you do have any self-declared environmental claims and they do use the term environmental product declaration, we would definitely advise you to look at that and maybe make a decision on whether or not you should remove that terminology, what kind of risk you're at, self-assess the risk, or maybe turn this into an environmental product declaration meeting the new edition of code. Investing in your data is always important. So the EPD quality and cost is determined long before the LCA begins. It's good primary manufacturing data is the foundation of every credible environmental assessment. If you have good data, you know what to collect, you know how to present it to the practitioner that's doing your EPD. It's one, going to bring costs down because it's a reduction in time to get this data, and two, it's just going to improve the quality of the EPD. And viewing verification as an opportunity, not an obstacle, is important because it really strengthens credibility, it builds customer confidence, and it also differentiates you in the marketplace. Like I said, it could open doors to procurement opportunities that may have been shut before, just having that verified EPD. Leveraging the LCA in your EPDs is very important because the LCA basically is going to show you your hotspots. It's going to show you, maybe we have too many replacement cycles, which is driving up our embodied carbon. If we have less replacement cycles, our embodied carbon comes down. Or maybe if we make this change to our manufacturing, maybe pick this raw material supplier versus that raw material supplier, it's going to bring our embodied carbon down measurably. So these are the kind of insights that developing an EPD, and all EPDs have an LCA report. That's what that's going to give you if you're looking to improve the performance of your product, and future proofing as well. So, we haven't seen any regulation go back yet. Now, I'm not going to say that regulation won't go back in time. I mean, different governments have different strategies, and some things remain in place and others don't. But it's essentially, you got to assess, are you willing to invest in future proofing your certifications? Let's say that the hammer drops on procurement, and Google's building a data center or what have you, a high rise building, and they're basically saying we're not buying anything unless it has an EPD. Well, now you're, at best 2 months, if not more, away from getting your EPD and potentially losing out on that procurement contract. So this is where it's important to kind of assess, as a company, is this something we're going to invest in, and be ready for when, somebody requests an EPD from us. It's not, hey, we'll get back to you in 3 months. It'll be, yeah, absolutely, here it is. So. And yeah, that pretty much wraps up our presentation. I'd like to thank FenCan and Terry for having us. Really appreciate the time to talk, and happy to answer any questions that come up.
Yeah, that's great. Acronym overload. Oh my, I thought we had lots of them, but that's excellent. That was really great. I've got a few questions, but Patrick's also posted a couple. I can always count on Patrick because oftentimes we ask the same questions. So in general, how far away are existing EPDs from Type 3 standard? How much change is going to be forced? Are Type 2 currently the most common? So he's wrapped up a few points in there, but the one I was considering was going from a current self-declared EPD to something that's verified. Is that a reasonably easy process, or is it start from scratch?
I wouldn't consider it start from scratch. I would say it's relatively easy because you already have kind of your manufacturing flows established, and easily you can communicate them easily to, let's say, if you were sending it our way. So a little bit of the guesswork is already done. But essentially, without knowing the background data, it's essentially starting from scratch. So I would say, you're giving it about a 10% head start, if you
Okay.
already have a self-declared claim.
Yeah. And are the self-declared sort of the most common out there at this point? I mean, obviously this is kind of a new world for fenestration, over the last number of years. Is it mostly self-declared that you're seeing, or where are we at in the industry getting on board with this as far as being verified?
I'd say it's a little bit of mix of both. We've definitely seen some EPDs. We've definitely seen some self-declared claims. We've definitely seen some LCA reports standalone. So, not a declaration, just an LCA. I don't really have the numbers to be able to say, you know, EPDs are easy to find and they're easy to substantiate, whereas self-declared is a little bit harder to find and substantiate. So having the numbers, it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great.
Because you
Uh,
have the EPDs on the program operator website or on tools like EC3, but like self-declared don't get there. They
okay.
might be on
Okay.
the
Yeah.
website of the manufacturer, but like who is gonna find that, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like fenestration manufacturers that are self-declaring their NAFS testing, right? I mean, they have reports, but they're not listed anywhere. So, okay, I get it. I love this one from Patrick. Can AI write my EPD?
So Dr. Zargar has been working on AI teams, and she's on the American Center for Life Cycle Assessment, Emerging Technologies. I'm gonna say no. Dr. Zargar, what do you think?
Like, we love to use AI, right? We all use because it reduces the time that we are working on, but we know that it does hallucination. Does it give us accurate numbers? It's like right now, I don't see it to be at that stage to develop a EPD um, because of all the data. All the first, we sign NDA with majority of our manufacturer because of the data. And for every piece of information I am putting in your LCA and EPD, I have to have proof. It's like, is there AI out there to develop a LCA that gives proof for every single information? Because the verifier, critical reviewer, they need proof. Right now, I don't see it there yet, but all the AI scientists, LCA scientists, we are working on it to see how we can utilize this AI at what stage of life cycle assessment. Am I just going to generate my bill of material over AI? Like, maybe that's not even accurate, but can it just write the sentences for me? Or can it just develop a graph or chart for me? It depends at which stage we are using. What is the data quality? How I'm documenting the usage of AI in developing EPDs or LCAs. So these are the items that are really important. But as any other sector, everyone loves to use AI, reduce the time, help with items. So less time, less money for everybody. So, but I would say at this point, I don't see any AI out there to be able to develop EPDs the same way that we do it in order to be verified.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
and there's also, AI likes to reference blog posts. And so if we are referencing blog posts at the end of our EPD, the program operator will probably laugh and then throw it in the garbage. And then also, we have to run the models as well. And so the models are run on a software called OpenLCA. And it's essentially similar to Excel. And, it can't put that information into that software in order to run the models to generate the results.
So yeah, we
Gotcha.
use OpenLCA or Brightway, which is a Python package for LCA, but there are also other software out there. So maybe these software developers would like to integrate AI, which I'm seeing out there, but like, we need to ensure that that AI is not hallucinating. It's the confidentiality of the data safe, etc., etc. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. Again, with Patrick, I'm going to take this and then paraphrase a bit. So he says, "Do you agree with CHBA that energy code development should pause until companies can get more prepared for this?" So CHBA, I'm sure you've seen it. They've done some pushback on the National Building Code 2025 adoption based on some concerns of affordability in housing, particularly the energy code, because there's a lot of things in the energy code that would increase costs for housing. So, is this activity, for lack of a better way of putting it, just another cost that's going to be passed on to buildings?
Yeah, absolutely it is because, EPDs cost money. And so, it depending on how many products you're selling, you can get, 10 or 12 products on one EPD. It's not the best way to do it, but it is possible. And that's how we are saving clients money. But I guess it all depends on like your like your sales as well, right? So if an EPD, let's say you're doing $1 million a year in sales and your EPD cost you, you know, $25,000. Well, that shouldn't affect your pricing that much. It might drive it up like, 0.5%, but it shouldn't be felt, um, for the end product.
Yeah. Um, okay, I'm gonna leave that
Theoretic,
one because
theoretically,
costs,
though, yeah.
costs are just killing us, testing and et cetera. Anyway, we'll move on. So Amber's saying, why is it not the best way to do an EPD by grouping products together? but I think you just said it is. Like that's what you do, right?
It's a good way to bring costs down, and to have EPDs for more products. But there's basically what's called a functional unit, right? So if your product has a different functional unit, so if you got 5 products and they all have different functional units, it's not good to have those on one EPD because they all function differently.
Yeah,
Um, whereas if your 5 products all have the same function, and the same square meterage or whatever the functional unit is, and they function the same, then yes, you should be able to put them together. But there are rules against that, and if the GWP differs in certain modules by so much, they're going to say no, those have to be different EPDs.
gotcha. Okay. You mentioned that a report has a 5-year life. EPD has a 5-year life. Um, does that mean after 5 years, you start from scratch with that one, or is it easily amendable and updatable?
So yeah, so if you go to the same person that did your EPD before, the pricing should be drastically lower because they should still have those models that they used.
Yeah.
All they
Okay.
have to
Yeah.
do is update the data that's coming in. If you go to a different company than previously did your EPD, they might just charge you the full price, even if you provide the report to them because they got to
Yeah.
rebuild the models and rerun them.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. Um, this is probably, I mean, we probably don't have enough time for this question, but I really struggle with the whole defining and calculating the grave concept. Manufacturers have no way of understanding or knowing how long their products are going to be in a building and what happens to those products after that. Do they go to recycling? Do they go to the landfill? I mean, there's all kinds of different paths that product can take. So, are you able to give me like a snippet of how do you figure out grave for a product?
Yeah, so I'll do part one of that, and I'll hand the grave side to Shiva there. So um basically, in the product category rule, it's going to tell you your reference service life of the product. So when we're talking about cradle to grave, the use cycle is in there. And so use means if we need to replace this product during, like, let's say building lifespan is 75 years, and let's say product lifespan, reference service life is 25 years. Well, now we know that we're replacing this product during the building's lifespan, and that's going to count towards its embodied carbon. Now, when it comes to recyclability, landfill, Dr. Zargar, I'll let you touch on that.
Yeah, like that's the beauty of having PCRs. In the product category rules, PCRs, they say like, okay, in North America, this product gets about this much percentage recycled. So, and if we don't have like accurate, like a specific manufacturer data, for example, if the manufacturer doesn't have a take back program and they don't recycle it, then we use those default numbers. And we are doing modeling, right? In the modeling, we try to be as close as the real world situation, but still there is uncertainty in modeling, in the data, etc. But we have to be as transparent as possible that how we get to these numbers. Like these, we assumed this percentage of recycling following PCR, or there are some research articles, peer review publications out there, we can use it. But overall, when these PCR committees come together, which I highly recommend industry people, if they see a call for PCR out there, like as a LCA scientist and EPD developer, I try my best to attend all these, to sit as a PCR committee to just share my experience and also learn from industry, because I know LCA well, you know your product fenestration well, like we can exchange our knowledge to develop a better PCR product category rules that can be absolutely useful for the industry. For example, you say, okay, there is no recycling information for glass in Canada. Maybe there needs to be some research on. We don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
if in 100 years they demolish the building using explosives and thereby nullifying any recyclability, I mean, you can't
Yeah.
control it, right? All you can do
Yeah.
is just take a best guess.
Yeah, it's where we see windows being replaced in 15 years and windows in houses in 50 years that are still perfectly usable. Anyway, okay, that's great. You kind of talked about the different project types and who's overseeing them, such as lead, for example. Where do you see this going between the different uh, project types? Like right now, it sounds like this is focused on part three, larger buildings that have engineers and architects and professionals involved. You know, is this coming to the part nine, single family, low rise townhouse world anytime soon?
I can't guarantee it will come anytime soon. I have a suspicion that in provinces like British Columbia that yes, it will
Yeah,
be coming
we lead
sooner
the
than
way.
later. Yeah,
Oh, that's good.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's also, let's say a builder adopts a greener building strategy, and the builder's, building 100 homes a year, and so that's their initiative. So that's why we kind of included, the Googles, the Amazons, just to show that, private industry mandates are also driving this as well.
yeah. Okay, okay. Um, Now, talking about, I think it's type three, which is the validated and reviewed, if you like. Who oversees that, and who um, enforces that, for lack of a better way of putting it? I mean, if you look at things like certified energy performance by groups like through NFRC and Keystone and NAMI and those guys, they'll come out and do a couple of audits a year in a manufacturer's facility. What's the oversight mechanism for making sure that the products are what the EPDs claim they are?
So essentially, it's the EPD verifier. They're the only person that stands between, whether or not this EPD is accurate or not. The EPD verifiers that have verified our EPDs that we've developed for clients, they have been some of the smartest people in the LCA community that are essentially, have been in it for 30 years. They're writing all the rules. They're essentially, the most experienced people in it. So and it really is trust on their part that they're doing their job correctly as well.
Yeah, yeah. And is that oversight at the time of the work and the reports, or is there ongoing oversight like audits or inspections, et cetera? Does that
N-
happen or no?
Nope. It's just
Yeah.
every time
Okay.
you renew your EPD.
Gotcha. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Any other questions from anybody? We're at time here. Um, Does not look like it. Wacey and Shiva, I really appreciate it. It's such an interesting topic, and it's another thing that's coming at our industry. People trying to understand, and what the requirements are, how to get on board, who to work with. That are the right people to work with, making sure that you're following the rules. So really interesting. Really appreciate your support in past events as well as today. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure that we're going to be talking much more over the next few years. Appreciate it.
Uh, Thank you very much for having us. And if anybody has any additional questions that come to mind, just please reach out to the emails below and we'd be happy to help you.
All right. Have a great summer, everybody. What's left of it. Appreciate your time, guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.